Hey, everybody, welcome to USA Wrestling's Moments Off the Mat. I'm Mike Clayton, your National Coaches Education Program Manager, and today we're joined by President of Las Vegas Events, Pat Christenson. How you doing, Pat?
Good to be here. I'm great.
That's great. And you fill a few roles. You're also on the National Wrestling Hall of Fame Board of Governors.
Yes, I am.
And in that role, I see this beautiful logo behind you, this Etched in Stone product. That's really about kind of like our purpose today is to talk a little bit more about this Etched in Stone series that National Wrestling Hall of Fame has started. And could you tell us a little bit about how this got started and maybe even what it is?
I wrestled at Wisconsin, in the 70s, and was asked to be on the Hall of Fame board. As the first time I ever walked through the Hall of Fame was the first board meeting, and I spent a couple hours, and it was enthralling to walk from display to display and envision some of a lot of the wrestlers, these legends that I knew, some I didn't know. But as I finished it, I thought, well, there's just a whole lot more to this than what's in these four walls. And so I started thinking about what's the best way to tell these stories. If you look at the different media for biographies, you've got documentaries, you've got 30 for 30, you have books, you have, but almost all of those are expensive, time consuming. And if you wanted to tell the stories of all of our legends, you'd never get through them. So fortunately, podcasting has become much more popular, and it's more popular every day. So rather than focus on one or two of our inductees, the scope of this of Etched in Stone is eventually, and I think our goal would be maybe 10 years to finish all 179. And the problem you have, and it's a good problem, you're gonna have more inducted as you go. But I think to get started is to produce and create stories in a very entertaining, concise way, but affordable. Do it so that you don't have to go out and raise $100,000, $250,000 every time you do it. So that is how Etched in Stone got started. Fortunately, my real job, which is the president of Las Vegas Events, we produced the National Finals Rodeo. And we started a podcast about the same time I came up with this idea. We'd probably done it about 2-3 months. And I got into podcasting and listening to the different types of podcasting. But what I didn't hear, there aren't a lot of biographical podcasts out there. And I don't know if people haven't stumbled into it yet. Maybe it's just, it's too much work. But that's the model I settled on. And that is, instead of, you have the interactive podcasts where you bring on a guest and for an hour, you can go through their history. And those are really good. Those are entertaining, but they're not concise. They don't tell the whole story. The Etched in Stone are meticulously produced in that we interview the legend, we interview the distinguished member, and then 12 to 15 people around them, parents, coaches, teammates. And it's wrestlers telling stories about wrestlers. Again, I have a background in wrestling. So when I envisioned doing this, I thought, well, I'm not quite sure. And it's not like I've ever done this before. It's not like I'm a Hollywood producer here that's stepping in. And so I'm learning as I go. But I thought, I think we've got to start with a test. And maybe the test becomes the template. So I chose two distinguished members, two inductees that I knew very well. Lee Kemp, who I wrestled with at Wisconsin, and Mark Chiarella, who I coached with out here in Vegas when I came out to Vegas. So, and the concept was really to record all these interviews and then cut them up, get a narrator, in this case, Jason Bryant for Mark Chiarella, who is he's a award-winning announcer in wrestling, but he's got a great voice, and he really understands. He does a podcast. He's a professional at this. So that's how I started. Put together a script. Had Jason be the narrator. Then I found this software package that allowed me to take the recordings, literally clip what I wanted into a script, and then Jason was easily able to include that in the recording. That's how we started. We started with marks, finished marks, and it ended up becoming 3 episodes that launches tomorrow, Tuesday. But at the same time, I thought, well, that's podcasting's weakness is there's no visual. So we also created a digital storybook that goes along with it. So wrestling fans, and that's really who the Etched in Stone was created for. I think there'll be a lot of other people that will enjoy it, but wrestlers, there's more about technique in it, buried in the stories, more about the again, when you look at a Mark Chiarella, Mark was well known for the pain that he delivered on top while en route to a pin. Well, Lee was very meticulous, very conservative. So the story behind those is interesting, but it includes, terms like the banana splits, guillotine, and a lot of wrestlers wrestlers and wrestling fans are going to know a lot of what that is. So it is a little bit more in depth, but it's all based on the stories. It's all to support the story. So you've got the podcast, which for both Kemp and Chiarella will be 3 episodes, 3 weeks in a row. Dan Gable's will be 2 episodes, and then the Smiths, John Smith, Pat Smith, and the Smith family complete the first season. So I know that was a long commercial here for Etched in Stone, but it's the story, the audio story through the podcast and the storybook.
And it's really interesting, and I appreciate you sharing kind of a little preview with me as I was kind of listening to it. There's so many things about, like, Coach Chiarella, I guess is I kind of like to refer to him. I came along where I got to know him after he'd already been accomplished, but he said he wanted to play basketball. Like, wrestling wasn't really his focus, and he wasn't that good at it his first year, and he only won 2 matches. And so it was really interesting to hear that, in my mind, seeing him as a legend, I've only known him as a legend. But to hear the backstory, to hear of his struggles and his trials, of even just to get on the wrestling mat, was really, to me, that was really kind of neat to hear. And I'm excited to dig into the rest of his podcast too.
Yeah, and I think the series goes that way. It's the template is, you've got how they got started, you've got their college and international careers, and then you have their professional careers. So it's split up into 3 different areas. So it follows it's a great look at these legends.
You mentioned in the video, as it's going through, Coach Chiarella talks about this template, right? He took his work ethic, he took all of his skills that helped him to be successful in wrestling, and then he applied them to business with tremendous growth for his insurance company. I mean, from 4 to 170 some employees. I mean, to see that growth, and he credits wrestling for that template. I mean, you're no you're no side standard to this either. You walked on at Wisconsin, but won a national title in '76, and then went on to take that template of your success. And now we see that through Las Vegas events and previously through the Thomas Mack Center. So how do you see, from your experience with this series so far, is that kind of how you see a lot of these people and their success, is they took what worked for them in wrestling and they've just continued to apply that in life?
Well, I think wrestling absolutely is great. You learn lessons in wrestling about life you won't learn any other way, but it depends on how you use them. Mark used values that were passed down from his parents, and he used those in wrestling, and then he used them. He had some adversity in terms of figuring out what he was going to do after he wrestled, and he had some adversity from going from being a three-time NCAA champ to making the decision to not go internationally. But his values always guided him. That's Mark's story, and those were passed down from his parents. He's passing them on to his kids. But I think what you'll see is how wrestling affected almost all positively every different story. In my case, it was, I was a high school senior. I'd gone to the state tournament in Wisconsin twice, but hadn't placed. My senior year, I was 27-0, had 21 pins, and I was thinking I was going to win a state tournament. And I lost in the sectional semifinal and didn't even go.
Wow.
So there was my first adversity, and that crushed me. It was, again, anybody that has been, and all your listeners, a lot of your wrestlers or fans or wrestlers, it always doesn't happen the way you want it to happen. But I wasn't finished. I didn't know how. Fortunately, my coach called up the Dwayne Clevin. Dwayne Clevin used to be the coach at Racine Park, which we wrestled Racine Park. I wrestled against those teams while Dwayne was there. I don't remember Dwayne then, but he won. I think he was only there 4 or 5 years, but he won 2 state titles in those 4 or 5 years. One year had 3 state champs. He became the coach at Wisconsin. So so my coach knew him. He called me up. I'll never forget my recruiting trip. I think they bought me the bus ticket. Maybe I bought my own bus ticket. It was Badger Bus Lines that left at 7 in the morning. I got to campus. They picked me up around 8:30. We walked around campus. It was Russ Ellickson and Dwayne, and went to the Broughton Brow for lunch, and they had me at hello. I mean, the fact that they even showed interest in me was all I needed. And so I walked on. Fortunately, I had good financial aid. I had a big family, I walked down at Wisconsin. But before that, I won the state tournament in freestyle and qualified for Iowa City. So I had a great tournament. In fact, in the finals, I wrestled one of my first matches with Joe Carr that I would wrestle through college and lost that match. But I got to the finals in Iowa City. So I thought, well, okay, that's where I started to set my focus on winning an NCAA title. And quite frankly, that wrestling room at Wisconsin and what Hellickson and Clevin were building, the timing couldn't have been any better. So that's how I got to Wisconsin. I qualified for the Nationals my freshman, sophomore year, didn't place. My junior year, I had walking pneumonia. I didn't even go. My senior year, I was going to put it all together. And you mentioned the not being seated. What was interesting, and you think, well, maybe I just got lucky. Maybe I had some great matches, some good matches. I had beat everybody seated in that tournament that year. I'd beat Zoberberg, I'd beat Carr, I'd beat Wagaman, but I also lost to Zoberberg and Wagaman. What I heard, and again, this is 40 years ago, is that Dan Gable, who was the seating represented the Big Ten, all the schools in the seating meeting, got locked in an elevator and wasn't able to represent us. So Jack Reinwan, who won it that year, got a 6th seat. I didn't get a seat. But fortunately, I got the news the night before and I'm disappointed. I said, but who do I have? Well, I had a kid named Jerry Valleco from Penn State. I had wrestled him in the World Camp that summer, and I felt pretty confident I could beat him. So I went to bed that night, feeling pretty good about where I was, because in my mind I had the 2nd seed, and turned out I did. I beat Valleco and had a good tournament. again, beating the same people I beat that year.
You've had a successful high school season, ended a little bit rough. Your college season sounds like it was a little bit more of the struggle early, and then the success came at the end. Where does this lifelong love of wrestling for you? Where a lot of our athletes, as they transition out of wrestling into what some people say out of wrestling, I don't know if we ever really get out of wrestling, but how did wrestling keep its hooks in you, and how have we been lucky to have you as an ambassador for our sport for so long? What were those steps, or what were those life events that continue to keep you involved after college with the sport?
So I coached at Wanakee High School, just north of Madison, for 3 years. And we had some success. We won our conference tournaments every year. We were runner up in the state one year, at a state champion. And I really liked coaching, but I really didn't like teaching. So I was looking around. I wrote letters to 10 warm weather schools. My priority wasn't to get, to get a apprenticeship at Iowa State. I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. So I thought, well, I'm going to continue to coach, get my master's degree, and we'll see. Well, Dennis Finfrock, who started the wrestling program at UNLV, and it's really interesting, the parallel here is there's a good section in the Mark Torella story about how Dennis recruited him to come to UNLV. So he was here a year before I was here, and Dennis saw me win the tournament in Tucson. And so he started right after that. For like 3 years, I would get calls once a year from Dennis to, come out to, when you're ready, come out to UNLV. Well, I finally got ready. In fact, but it was not, it wasn't much of a stipend. They didn't have much of a wrestling program. Larry Shakatano at LSU recruited me and made the trip down there. I loved LSU. It was gorgeous, beautiful, met my criteria of weather, and a great program. So I was all set. Right at the end, 2 weeks before I was set to go, a job opened at UNLV as event coordinator in athletics. And what that meant was, in the early 80s, UNLV played their basketball games at the convention center, which was 7,000 seats. And the stadium then was managed by the convention center, which was 30,000. My job was to manage the event for UNLV. So the basketball games, football games, I'd hire all the ushers, ticket takers, do the ticket office, do the parking, manage everything around the event for the athletic department. But what Dennis made it very clear is that's kind of a side job for you. You're the assistant coach, wrestling coach. So that paid a lot more. But more importantly, it was a different, I had never even thought about getting into events. And even, quite frankly, I didn't until about the third year we were out there. UNLV got in some real trouble, both with the NCAA and financially, and they dropped wrestling. Fortunately, Dennis took the job at Thomas & Mack, asked me to come on as this assistant. So that's where I transitioned from wrestling into the event world. So that's kind of that wrestling career. But during that time, I got married in 1985. We had 2 girls. Both of them were very athletic. Both of them played basketball through high school. Both of them went to the state tournament. So I followed them. My career as a coach was with them whenever they let me coach them. But we followed them very closely, and I really wasn't that. I wouldn't say I left wrestling, but I wasn't very active, even in paying attention to it. When they graduated, I got to know Rich Bender real well. Rich is a fanatical, if you know Rich, he's a fanatical rodeo fan. So we had something in common there right off the bat. And little by little, I got back into wrestling. So that's kind of how I that's been my career in and out of wrestling.
It's really cool. And so Rich, that relationship with Rich is kind of what helped kind of bring you back to the sport?
Well, we did we did the U.S. Open regularly here in Vegas. We always talked about the World Championships, and finally in 2015, we did hosted the World Championships out here. We did the Olympic trials, so I got to know Rich that way. But also, became a good friend with him. We have just kind of common values, and one of them being wrestling. So that's kind of what led me to get involved with the National Wrestling Hall of Fame.
That's really cool. I haven't had a chance to go to the 15 Worlds. Everybody I talk to says of all the World Championships they've been to anywhere in the world, 15 in Vegas was hands down as beautiful a venue and showcase as we could have had.
The year before the World Championships, Rich said, you need to really go to, you need to go to one of these. And I said, oh yeah, I might. I said, where's the next one? He says, is it Kazakhstan?
In 14, it was Uzbekistan. Yeah.
Uzbekistan. So I looked at Uzbekistan on the map and I said, Rich, thank you, but no, thank you. And, I know we did a good job in Vegas, but the bar for the World Championships in some of these third world countries, it's the fact that you can win in that environment half the time is amazing in itself. So I think the fact that we created an environment, a really good competitive environment, good fan environment, and the Orleans arena just worked out perfect for everybody.
Yeah, it was beautiful. And by the way, you didn't, other than some really good wrestling in 14, I picked up a parasite. So I think it was probably good that you decided to stay home.
I was a no as soon as I saw the dot on the map. I mean, it sits between, I think it's Pakistan, Iraq, and like, oh no, I don't, Rich, have fun.
I think we had 8 different flights over 48 and a half hours is what it took for us to get there when we flew over. So yeah, to try to think about that, and then elite performance for an athlete and a coach in that environment, really difficult, no doubt.
You'd have to be one hell of a wrestling fan to make that trip.
And it was interesting. I will say that it was an interesting trip. This is great. For the folks that, here watching Moments Off the Mat, any thoughts or any kind of last words about this series and why you feel it's so important for so many of our wrestling fans and even non-wrestling folks? Why would this be so important for these folks to tune into this podcast? And then maybe also, how do we tune into that podcast too?
So I tell you who I think it's important for. I think it's important for wrestling because these stories, when you look at wrestling as a sport, people argue that it is the toughest sport. When you finish this series, it won't be arguable anymore, because what people don't understand is they hear about it, they hear pieces of it, but as you get into the different these legends, they all were part of that commitment. There aren't a lot of just talented wrestlers that made it, and you look at how the work ethic that Dan Gable adopted and really became the godfather of that type of work ethic, and everyone that followed. I think for us as a sport, these will solidify wrestling not only as the toughest sport, but just the most competitive in terms of all facets of what you need to reach the pinnacle. And I think so the importance is that those stories need to be told. They need to be archived, they need to be chronicled in history forever. But for the wrestling fan, I don't think it's important that you see this, but if you don't, you're missing out. When I knew Lee and Mark pretty well before I started, but the the story, the way they both achieved what they achieved in their lives, or probably the most rewarding part of doing the whole thing. And I'm now looking so much forward to a guy like Ryan Warner, who is doing Dan Gable. And interestingly enough, Ryan was doing the Dan Gable series. We didn't know each other. I bumped into him about halfway through finishing the Torella, saw what he did with Gable, gave him a phone call, and said, would you contribute Gable's what you did with Gable to the series? And of course he did. And he said, you know what? He says, you know who I'd really like to do this with? I'd like to do this with John and Pat Smith. And I said, Ryan, I think I might be able to arrange that. So it was, I don't know who's getting more out of this, Ryan or us, but it was like those were his legends. I mean, they were at the top of his list. So that's the hope for Etched in Stone, is you get people that know these, not only know these legends really well, but are big fans of the legends. So, and they're wrestlers, or they have wrestling writers, or and they can ask the questions and tell the story in a way that a wrestling fan or a wrestler would. So I think that's the first thing that people are going to appreciate. I think the other the part you're going to enjoy is it's pretty professionally done. They're professionally edited. You can get them on all of the podcast channels on Spotify, Apple Music, iTunes. The host site is the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. So tomorrow on the 17th of November, if you want to, you can go to the National Wrestling Hall of Fame. I believe it's sitting right there on the homepage to click on it. And a new episode launches every Tuesday. So the Mark Torella story is 3 weeks in a row. Lee Kemp's story then will be three weeks in a row. Gables will follow the Smiths, and then the new season with a new set of inductees will start in right around March 1st.
This is great. And what an exciting time to be able to check these things out, throw them on your phone, go for a hike or a jog, and just really get a chance to, like you said, learn more from the legends of our sport. And it was really interesting in the intro podcast, like they just kind of, did like a minute or two intro, and it talked about the number of people that make it to an NCAA tournament, and then the number who make national titles. And that number just every time gets smaller and smaller. And I've heard that being an All-American in wrestling is harder than being an All-American, or harder than making it to the NFL as a college football player. Statistically, it's harder to be a college All-American wrestler. And so to hear your statistics about to win it and then to go on to those additional elite levels, whether it's coaching or international, it's a pretty small group of folks, and really super excited. I can't wait to check out more.
And again, yeah, it was, I think fans will enjoy it. And I think this will launch, my hope is that within 10 years that we have recorded our history of all of our inductees.
This is great. And so for our fans, they can get this on the National Wrestling Hall of Fame website starting tomorrow, November 17th. They can also get it on any of the podcast download capabilities. And any final words or any additional information that we should make sure folks know before we head out today?
No, I hope they find it. I hope they enjoy it.
This is great. And we'll make sure to put some information down on the bottom of the screen so that people can get directly to that link.
Super.
It's really cool. Thank you so much, Pat, for your time, for all the work that you've given back to our great sport of wrestling. And any closing words for our folks before we sign out?
No, enjoy the stories.
This is great. I know I already enjoyed Mark Torella's, and I'm really looking forward to Lee Kemp's. Having had a little bit of opportunity to work with Lee and knowing a little bit his story, boy, I can't wait for those to come out too. So thank you so much for all your work and helping make this happen.
You're welcome.
That's great. So for all of us at USA Wrestling and Moments Off the Mat, and for Pat Christenson, president of Las Vegas Events and board National Wrestling Hall of Fame, thank you for all you're doing to help preserve the legacy and the stories of our sport.
You're welcome.